I'm talking about identity rooms. The idea that writing doesn't just express who I am, it actively shapes who I become. And at the center of this is a tension I've been wrestling with for a long time. Writing asks me to choose which version of myself steps forward. But audiences, real, imagined, and constructed, also pull on that choice. So the question I keep returning to is simple but unsettling. Is the audience first or last? Do I write for myself or do I write for the people watching? To understand that tension, I had to look at two frameworks that shape how identity appears on the page: personal branding and rhetorical theory. Branding experts like Matt Gray argue that audience comes last, that creativity depends on blocking out what people think so that you can focus on your own taste, intuition, voice, and it's a compelling idea, especially for creatives who feel pulled in 1,000 different directions. But rhetorical theory doesn't let you off the hook that easily. In Threshold Concept 1.2, writing addresses, invokes, or creates an audience. And this ideal reframes writing as a social and rhetorical activity. Writing responds to people, writing anticipates people, and writing constructs people. And once I understood that, the conflict between branding and, or we can say, creative, control or creative freedom and rhetorical um, and rhetoric make more sense. Branding is a fixed identity. Who you are as a creative, as an artist, is a fixed identity, you think. And then rhetoric insists that we must constantly shift across different contexts. To see how this plays out, we have to go through what naming what we know says about audiences: the addressing audience, the invoking audience, and the creating audience. The first one that most of us are all familiar with is, for instance, Facebook. This is a known audience. This is people that you're addressing as yourself, essentially, and you know exactly who you're talking to because they're part of where you grew up. They're part of your identity, your communal version of yourself, who you are inside of your community. The next, and we can see Berlin talks about this framework as the writer's identity and the subject and the audience expectation shaping that identity or that representation of identity. But moving to invoking, when I am invoking as, as a writer in my fiction or essays, I'm speaking to an audience that aren't physically present to me. It's not like Facebook when I'm messaging, my mom, or I'm posting to my, my book club or whatever. This is an audience that I hope wants to hear my voice. Similarly to when Baldwin writes from the perspective of a white supremacist and going to meet the man, he is imagining an audience that wants to hear what an African American man has to say or interprets the story through line of a white supremacist. And then there's a room where I create my audience, where I attempt to create my audience. My author website doesn't just address readers, it constructs them. It positions me as a professional author. It positions readers as people who want to know that version of me. this is a point of tension between branding and rhetoric. You know, branding wants consistency. You know, my website is the same as my Instagram, is the same as my X, is the same as my this, whatever. Where rhetoric demands that I adapt each form to each form that I'm presenting my content in. Although Chris Do says that it's about finding your true, authentic voice and showing up as a essentially perfectly imperfect version of yourself, it's Aristotle that brings the idea that rhetoric is performance. That the same words spoken by a nervous speaker come out differently or are interpreted differently than a confident one. An identity isn't just expressed, it's enacted. And suddenly the room metaphor makes more sense. So each writing space demands a different self. Each audience shapes what I present. So identity isn't fixed, it's rhetorical. Just like I'm not the same version of myself in the living room that I am in the kitchen, that I am in the bedroom. Each place shapes how I present myself. The person I am when I'm cooking and, in the kitchen working is not the same version of myself that I am sitting in my living room, relaxing, watching, TV or reading a book. And all of this points to not being a different person in each one of those rooms, but having different activities or different expectations of the activities that should transpire in those particular areas. So each writing space demands a different self. Each audience shapes what I foreground, and identity is rhetorical and not fixed. I'm negotiating actively who I am on the page. And the question isn't whether the audience comes first or last. The real question is, which room am I in, and who do I need to speak honestly in that room? Thank you for listening.